Willie Mays changed the way the game was played. He is the most spectacular baseball player that ever played.
Here's Willie Mays, the first great African-American superstar to show the world that baseball is changing.
San Francisco accepted him as an athletic star, but not as a person they wanted to live next door to. He could not buy there.
He stated, I'm going to make changes by going out and being the greatest baseball player that I can be.
The epitome of Willie Mays was the famous catch in the World Series.
30 yards went to 40 yards, a little further.
And he makes a miraculous catch as he stops a step short of the wall.
That catch is one of the greatest athletic performances in sports history.
Hello, I'm Jerry Brewer, a sports columnist here at the Post. And thanks for joining us on Washington Post Live for another in our Race in America series. Joining me today to talk about his HBO documentary, Say Hey Willie Mays, is filmmaker Nelson George. Nelson, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh man, I cannot wait to talk about this. You got me in trouble. I had some things that my wife wanted me to do, and I had to delay that for almost 2 hours.
Well, hopefully she forgave you.
Yeah, the honeydew got done a little bit later, but this was just wonderful. I couldn't help thinking about this film from the fact that we lost Hank Aaron and Bill Russell over the past year. And I was just thinking, what wonderful timing that we were able to do this while we still have Willie Mays. Why was the moment right for you to do this film?
Well, I mean, we've been trying to get this done. The producers have been trying to get this done at least since 2015. As you know, Willie is historically not very open to the press. I think we're probably the first film crew to be in his house in years. So it was a long process. I think that the timing was just a matter of, it would have happened a lot sooner if it wasn't for COVID. Let's put it that way. That definitely put a damper and made us have to wait. But I think that your point about Hank and your point about Bill Russell is very on point. I mean, Willie is a product of a world where the crossover started happening in athletics. While Jackie Robinson was the first Black player in the major leagues, it was Willie and then people like Ernie Banks and Hank Aaron, Lou Brock, Bob Gibson, etc., Elston Howard, who were that wave of Black talent that came in and particularly transformed the National League into a league of a more exciting, more aggressive brand of baseball. But was Willie as probably the most exemplar of that aesthetic. Willie excelled at what they call the 5 tools in baseball: hit was power, run, field, throw. And he did all of those at a high level. But it's not just the numbers. He had 660 home runs, which is amazing. But he was also a joyous player to watch. He introduced a basket catch, which no one else did before or since, in which you catch the ball at your waist, violating every rule of baseball. He was known for his hat flying off when he ran around the bases. He just was a charismatic character. In the 1960s, the San Francisco Giants were the #1 drawer in Major League Baseball. Now they only went to the World Series in '62, but Willie, along with the great teammates Juan Marichal, Cepeda, Willie McCovey, were probably the most entertaining team of the era.
So how did you get Willie to open up? You talked about how he was notorious about not wanting to do interviews, and he was filling you out. I mean, you even saw a little bit of that in the documentary. How'd you get him to open up?
Well, it's funny. So we get there. We did 2 days back to back. The first time we met was Willie, and the first hour or so, he's feeling me out. He's not giving me great answer. Now you got to remember that Willie, his eyes are very bad and his hearing's very bad. But at some point during the conversation, I realized that I'm talking to him like an icon. I need to talk to him like my uncle or like any older black man from the South. And I started sort of picking at him a little bit, and he responded to that because he's one of the greatest jocks of all time. He's a lot. He loves the clubhouse. He loves the banter. And if you stick around to see the very end of the film, in the closing credits, there's all this kind of back and forth with me and Willie, and he loved it. And I think that really opened him up, and he felt more comfortable. Willie Mays has the biggest hands I've ever seen in a human being. They're immense. Okay, so one of Willie's favorite things is for you to shake his hand. Now, even at that point, that was 89. Even at 89, 90, 91, he'll crush your hand. And so you see a little bit of me like sparring with him and trying to hang in there with him. It's funny you said that about that we took that era of black athletes. There was a comment that was made, I think, on ESPN last year about athletes from the 60s. They were part-time plumbers, they were firemen, they weren't athletes like we are now. Well, I'll tell you what. One of the things we really emphasized in the film was Willie's body, his hands. We really focused on these immense hands. We also show him in it must be 1949 or 50, this picture of Willie in a locker room as a young man, and the brother has an 8-pack. And this is the era way before all the training and all the kind of weightlifting we do now. He was an athletic specimen who could compete on the athletic level with anybody playing today. So I wanted to establish that physicality in the film, and then also his baseball intellect. From Barry Bonds to all of the players who played with him, his understanding of the game, looking at pitchers, looking at alignment of how we should play certain players. Willie, while he was the Giants, was the on-field defensive captain in an era when there weren't coaches like they have now. They have computer printouts to tell you where to play guys. Willie would do it from center field, and he would use his glove, and he would tell guys, go left, go right, go left, go right. And if they didn't play the next day. So even though he was never a formal manager, Willie ran the field defensively for his entire tenure in San Francisco.
Just move a little to the left or the right, stay out of my way, and I'll go get it.
Exactly.
Nelson, we have a clip of Willie reflecting on his career. Let's take a look.
It's difficult right now to even try to explain to you how much I love baseball. I think we had what you call a love affair.
There goes Willie Mays, the greatest player to ever play this game.
Nelson, so this is a simple question, but a big question. What does baseball mean to Willie Mays?
It's everything. I mean, it took him from Birmingham, Alabama in the 1940s. I mean, he went to a high school that was one of those technical high schools where they didn't really emphasize academics, right? So I think his major was learning how to be a cleaner, to work in the cleaners. I mean, that's the kind of training he was getting. So he knew he needed to figure out a way to get out of that. His father, Cat Mays, was a hardworking dude. He was a steel worker. He also did Pullman Porter work sometimes on the weekends, and he was a minor league baseball player. And back in that era, all the steel mills and teams had baseball teams, athletic teams for the workers. And he was apparently a very good player. At around 4 or 5 years old, he saw something in his son and really steered him toward sports. And it's interesting because Willie could have pursued a basketball career and tried to be a trotter. He was a star player on his high school basketball team. Apparently, he was a quarterback on his high school football team. But he knew back in that era, there was no athletic scholarships to major colleges. If you didn't play for the Trotters in terms of basketball, there wasn't much money to be made. So baseball was a sport where he could play, as he said to himself, and play a long time. And Willie played from in the majors from 51 to 73, 22 years. Played into his 40s, which back then, if you were an outfielder, I mean, it was very, very rare for you to get that far in the game. So he chose baseball because he knew it was something he could play for a long time. And then he learned the nuances of it. He was trained starting in the Negro Leagues, really, with a guy named Piper Davis, who managed the Birmingham Black Barons. Willie had several mentors who really looked after him, or Willie likes to say "take care of." It's a big phrase for Willie. The idea of people taking care of him when he was young, and him taking care of people later. And part of his love for baseball is that camaraderie and that sense of community, that sense of we're all in this together. And to this day, until COVID hit, he would go, on a weekly basis to the Giants club when the Giants were home in San Francisco. They have a room where they set up Willie at a desk. The young Giant players came in, so he's part of the tradition of the Giants. And players from other teams came in. Willie Mays is in the house. I'm going to meet him. So the game, the nuances and the camaraderie are what made him love the game.
So Willie got to live in three very different areas. Obviously in Birmingham, being from Alabama with the Black Barons, then going to the New York Giants, who become the San Francisco Giants, and then obviously at the very end coming back to New York to play for the Mets. In addition to just traveling the country, what do you think Willie's experiences playing in these different cities across the country? How do you think that kind of informed his blackness? What do you think it meant to him as a black man being in these very, very different parts of the country? What did he learn?
Well, Willie's not someone who's going to tell you about. He's not going to bring up racism. He's not going to bring up bad things that happened to him. He's a guy who's going to always talk about. You bring up something in an historical incident that happened to him. He's going to go, well, yes, but these people helped me and these people helped me. So he tends to look on the positive side. So if you ask him about growing up in Birmingham, he's not going to tell you about the limitations. He's going to tell you about the community and the people that he was with, who helped him and bonded with him. He's not going to dwell on the stuff that we usually dwell on. Coming to New York was a profound thing because you go from Birmingham, Alabama, where you're living in an all-black community predominantly, but one that's kind of constricted by where you can go and what you can do. He loved being in Harlem. One of my favorite parts of the film is the description of his life in Harlem. Initially, he lived only 2 blocks away from the polo grounds where they played with a black family. Famously, these kids would come out in the neighborhood and play stickball with them. He would play stickball with them. Local kids. He was very much connected to the young people and kids. He always was. 7th Avenue back in the 50s was a fantastic sort of boulevard of fun. There was the Great Sugar Ray had a spot on 7th Avenue. There was a place called the Small's Paradise that Wilt Chamberlain ended up buying at some point. And there was the Red Rooster, which was a spot that became Willie's hangout. A guy named George Woods owned it. And they reserved a table in the back for Willie. So back then, you mostly played day games. So he would come after a game, have a meal, hang out, meet, folks. So that Harlem world was really, really supportive of him. And then, he met his first wife in Harlem. So that was the maturing experience of being in a different kind of black community, one where there's a lot more possibility, a lot more glamour, a lot more money. And then San Francisco was a change because it wasn't, unlike Birmingham and also like New York and Harlem, it didn't have as big a black community, especially in the 50s. And it certainly didn't have that level of the many different variety of places you could go, restaurants and life. So he became a little bit more reclusive, it may be one word, or definitely more protective. When he divorced his first wife in '62, he got a really beautiful kind of bachelor house that had his son described it as the Bat Cave because he had a ladder, a spiral staircase built in the middle, so he could go really literally from his bedroom through his living room down to his car and drive to the ballpark. And so he spent a lot of time, instead of him being out as he was in New York in the 50s, he was more likely to invite Hank Aaron, to invite Bob Gibson, to invite Joe Morgan over to his house for dinner after game and bond play pool. He's a big pool player. So each city, Birmingham, New York, Harlem, San Francisco, was a slightly different experience for him.
You had such a great and so often it's subtle appreciation of the way that Willie played, and I think you presented him uh, not just as an athlete, but as an artist in a certain
Right.
way. So just
Yeah.
tell me what set him apart as a player from the other greats of his time.
Well, there's a skill level. I mean, I think the way to describe Willie and think about him is in the early 60s, particularly when those peak years from when he got to San Francisco in 58, through 66, 67, he's equivalent figure to like a Sammy Davis Jr. or Sidney Poitier. He's a star, not just a player, but he's a star who's people like, they're attracted to. Um, and he had a kind of light around him. So when he played the game, he's someone that people stop to watch, and not just watch at bat, which happens with sluggers. You watched him in the field because he was flamboyant in a way that was. I mean, I go back to the basket catch. I mean, we talk about black excellence and we talk about black innovation. In almost every sport that black people move into in significant numbers, they bring an attitude, they bring a spirit, they bring a style that wasn't there before. I like to call it BAA, the Black Athletic Aesthetic, which is kind of like I'm here, but I'm gonna put a little something on the game. And the basket catch was such a signature thing. It seems like a simple thing. The ball's coming in the air and you catch it like this at your waist. But a moving baseball hit by powerful men at big speeds is not nothing to joke with. And most people who try to basket catch either miss the ball completely or get hit upside the head. So he had an ability to bring that to the game. The other thing we tried to show in the film that speaks to his celebrity was that Willie was on the Ed Sullivan Show regularly, which was the #1 show in America every Sunday night. He was on sitcoms like Bewitched, like the Donna Reed Show. So he was accepted and celebrated in by white fans and white media in a way that was quite unique, and that sort of sets up and sort of predates the crossover athlete world of the Jordans and the Magic Johnsons later. He was that guy. And I always like to say that before Ali became the dominant figure in terms of black sports and American sports, it was Willie. Baseball was the biggest sport in America well into the 60s, and Willie was the most charismatic player in the game at that time. And I think one other thing for people to understand, because there have been so many home run records broken in the last few decades, when Willie broke Mel Ott's National League home run record, I think it was 514. The only person who hit more home runs than Willie at that point in time, and this is mid 60s, was Babe Ruth. So we've had the records a lot, but at that time it was unprecedented, and that 714 number loomed ahead of him as the only, the next goal. But again, Willie wasn't just a home run hitter. He was a base stealer, and he was a captain, and he was a correct, charismatic guy who was actually a pretty good actor when you watch these sitcoms. So I think in terms of the entire package, Willie's a dominant player because of not just how he played per se, his numbers, but the style, the energy, the charisma.
Jackie Robinson, who Willie Mays modeled himself after, criticized him for not doing enough during the civil rights movement. Um, how did Willie contribute to the civil rights movement, and how did you kind of deal with handling all of the nuances of that situation and understanding it?
Well, I think #1, Willie. I think one of the things to understand about Jackie and Willie, when Jackie came to the majors, he's already been in the Army. He's been to UCLA. He's a very morally sophisticated guy. One reason that the Branch Rickey sought him out. Willie was 20 years old when he got to New York, just a year or two out of high school in Alabama. So he never felt totally comfortable as a spokesperson. He always felt like Jackie or, Dr. King, whoever else were more qualified to lead that discussion. So part of it was, I think, a little bit of self-consciousness. I think that what we look at Willie, we look at two levels. We look at his ability to penetrate white America. And I mean that as a celebrity, I mean that as TV appearances, I mean that as a figure of to be emulated by a generation of white fans who for whom Jackie was the pioneer breakthrough, but Willie was the one who became the star at that next level, right? And then two is Willie as a mentor. One of the main threads of the documentary for me is this idea of mentorship. And it starts with Willie's father, with Willie Piper Davis of the Birmingham Black Barons. And then later, Leo DeRocher taking him in and mentoring him in the early days in New York. And then Willie becoming a mentor himself to the wave of Latino players who came in. The Giants were one of the teams who really embraced Latin ball players and brought in big numbers, Juan Marshall, Orlando Cepeda, Tito Fuentes, and more. And then Willie becoming a mentor for Bobby Bonds, who is a fantastic player, the father of Barry Bonds. So that thread is a big part of it. And ultimately, Willie as a person who did behind the scenes stuff. Willie helping, we had Willie Brown, the former mayor of San Francisco, also at one point one of the most powerful people in the California state legislature, and how he helped him raise money and did that for many, many other people. So Willie wasn't an outside agitator guy. He was an inside person. I think something else to be pointed out, because we deal with Jackie's criticism and we deal with Willie's reply and the point of view of Barry Bonds and other people. I really wanted to make sure that we had that dialogue from a number of points of view. What is Black activism, and what are the ways in which it can manifest? And certainly, Professor Harry Evans, Professor Harry Edwards, who is a fantastic thinker and activist in Black activism, criticizes Willie along with Jackie. At the same time, you have Willie Brown and other people and Todd Boyd from USC talking about Willie and his context and how he viewed the world. So I think what I tried to do was to definitely address the criticism, because I think that's an important part of the historical record of Willie, but also to really honor Willie's point of view. And I think one of the things to think about now is in this era of Black Lives Matter and activism, there are people who are really upfront, and there are other people who are not upfront, but who doesn't mean they're not doing things to help the community. So I do think that you need what I would say, you need the tree shakers and you need the jelly makers. When that tree falls from the trees, when that fruit falls from the tree, someone has to be the one who turns it into something edible. And that's kind of, I think, how Willie was. Willie was a person who took the fruit and shared it with others.
We have a question from an audience question from Gerard from Texas, who asks, Willie Mays often played himself into chronic exhaustion, especially at the end of regular seasons and pennant races. Can you please comment on his regular season hospitalizations for treatment for exhaustion?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact number in front of me, but from like 1958 to like the 60s, Willie probably missed, and they played like, at that day, they played, I think, 155 games, not the 162 most of that time. He missed only like 20, there's like a 10-year span where he missed maybe only 21 games. And of those 21 games, I think the Giants only won 7. So he believed, and this is the way it was in that era. You played every day. There were very few off days for players. They played all day games, so they played in the sun. And he just believed that the team had the best chance of winning when he was there. So he played himself into exhaustion, I think, at least 3 times in his career. And he collapsed straight out and was put in a hospital. It's both a reflection of his dedication to the game, right, and to the Giants, but also a reflection of the values of the time. It wasn't, we live in an era where athletes are and everyone, we have mental health breaks and we have days off. Pitchers don't pitch 9 innings anymore. This was not that era. This was the era where you were a star. You were expected to be on the field every day, no matter what your condition, and try and make it work. And so Willie was a product of that. And he he believed that that was the only way to be a leader. And then you lead by being on the field. If you have a headache, if you have a sore back, if you have a sore knee, he played through all of that, and eventually his body gave out, several times. So yeah, it's a reflection of both his mentality, but also of the values of the era.
Nelson, Barry Bonds, Willie's godson, brings a whole nother level of emotion and humanity to the project. Just what was the process like? When during the making of this, did you interview Barry Bonds? Were you expecting him to elevate it as much as he did?
So we were shooting at the birthday party for Willie, 90th birthday. You see it in the film. And I met Barry that day, and he said he was obviously interested in supporting Doc that his godfather was in. It took a while for him to really sit down, because I feel like we can go. That's a whole nother discussion. But ultimately, Barry's relationship with the press was very bad. He's been accused of using steroids and so things, and he's always been in denial about that. So it's been a fight, and so he doesn't trust the media. I think he probably had people, a couple of got your interviews where people said they were going to interview him about it and then tried to get him on. So it took a while to gain his trust. But when we sat down, as you'll see in the doc and as you've seen, he was as vulnerable and open, as loving as I think he's ever been on camera. Talking about Willie really brought out some nuance and some deep love that people hadn't seen, and I was so pleasantly surprised. I knew that talking about Willie would be easy, but I didn't know it would be so emotional. And the other thing I could just add is that so we sat with Barry we did about the first hour, and we got a lot of the things I needed for the doc. But then he went on for another half hour or so, just talking about baseball and his understanding of the game, his understanding of hitting. And I'm talking about scientific level, talking about velocity versus bat speed. And I mean, whatever people can say, he didn't hit those baseballs by accident. He was mentored, as he talks about in the film, by two excellent. He was mentored by Willie Mays, his godfather, one of the greatest, if not the greatest player of all time, and his father, Bobby, who people don't forget. Bobby was a 300 home run, 300 stolen base guy, an excellent player, an all-star caliber player at several teams. So he had these two different mentor figures driving him, and he took in those lessons and intellectualized those into building a historic career.
One last question for you, real quick, Nelson. I hear you. Barry Bonds was able to share with you Willie Mays' reaction to the film, that he's watched it over and over.
Yeah.
How much does that mean to you?
Well, I think when you opened, you talked about the loss of Hank and of Bill Russell, and the fact is that it's something when you make something that you're trying to sum up or celebrate someone's life. It's great when they can see it, and I think it's great. Willie is the oldest living baseball Hall of Famer, and he's had a hell of a life. So I think when he watches the film, I'm sure what the film is doing is triggering his memories. So him seeing the catch in '54, him seeing him with Orlando Cepeda, or hanging out, or the year he played with, 2 years he played with the Mets. These are bringing back memories that are deep, and he's seeing things that we're not. I'm sure he's seeing the film, but he's also seeing deeper into the film, and that makes me very happy.
Oh man, Nelson, unfortunately, we're out of time. I got more honeydews to do, so I'm going to leave it there. Nelson George, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And thanks to all of you for watching. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head over to WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find out more information about upcoming programs. I'm Jerry Brewer, and thank you for joining us on Washington Post Live.